Hi, my dearest family. Here is your weekly forecast starting on the 14th of May until the 19th of May. We are covering only 5, 6 days, but it's pretty punched. So let's get started. We are in the third week of May, and we are seeing a bit of a transition from the grounded material focus of Taurus into more of a fast-paced communicative energy of Gemini. So you will see why in a short while. We are starting the 14th with a triple conjunction between Sun, Ceres, and Mercury. Now, I did make a separate video about that. That's a lot longer. So in this video, I'm just going to be giving you a bit of a summary of this. But I highly recommend listening to the longer version because, of course, that might be giving you a lot more takeaway. But this is about practical manifestation, really. So we've got the sun, which is about your identity, your core principles. We've got Mercury involved, which is the mind. So that would be a Cosimi moment, which is often about mental clarity. And now it gets combined with Ceres, the asteroid of nurturing and harvests. So the focus turns to the tangible cultivation of resources. So this is a very ideal window for finalizing contracts, restructuring your budget, launching a project that requires long-term sustainability. And a conjunction is always about planting the seeds. So let's plant the seeds regarding business venture or even certain type of strategic breakthrough needed to see them, take roots. We're gonna have a new moon happening in the sign of Taurus. Now, remember that I always break down the new moons and the full moons eclipses for my private members. The membership is available on YouTube as well as on my website, depending on which one you would like to consider. But usually a new moon video lasts for about 2.5, 3 hours altogether. Because of course I break it down for 12 signs as well as I'm gonna give you a general interpretation. So if you want to be part of it. So again, that new moon in the sign of Taurus, it's about sealing that intention that is happening between the Sun, Mercury, and Ceres. So while the 14th was about the idea and the plan, the 60th is a bit about commitments. So you can use this weekend to simplify things, to edit things a little bit. It's less about hustle and more about giving the foundation to something. Whether you are organizing your workspace or automating your savings, the goal is to create a system that runs efficiently, but without minimal future effort, really. And also, let's not forget that Mercury will be shifting into the sign of Gemini, and Mars will be entering the sign of Taurus this week as well. So, Mercury moving into its home sign of Gemini speeds up communication, emails, social interactions. However, Mars entering Taurus acts as a stabilizer, ensuring that while the mind is moving fast, the body stays focused on one task at a time. So you may find your inbox suddenly overflowing on Sunday, Monday. You can really use that Gemini influence to brainstorm, to network, but lean on that Taurus Mars to ensure you don't overpromise or underdeliver. That's about focus on slow burn productivity rather than kind of like frantic multitasking. And then we're going to have Mercury in trine to Pluto, while the Sun enters also Gemini as well. Now, this is going down on May 19th and 20th. So that would be a mental trine, right? Mercury in Gemini connecting with Pluto in Aquarius gives you the detective energy needed to solve a complex problem, have a deeply transformative conversation, and the Sun moving into the sign of Gemini, kicking off the astrological month, of social activities and a lot of curiosity. So I think Tuesday is actually one of the best day of the week for difficult negotiations, deep dives into research, even studying as well. I think Mars in Taurus might be giving you a lot of willpower to see past distractions and find the core truth of a situation. And by Wednesday, the energy lightens a little bit, making it a great time for social gatherings, social meetings, but also public facing work as well. But maybe let's go into these energy patterns a lot deeper. Or let's go through them one by one, and let me add some asteroids as well that you can work with. But before we do that, I would like to remind you that my relocation course is approaching super fast. It's a 16-week course. It's going to teach you 6 techniques to determine the best place ever to live on Earth. And this is going to become a huge topic with Uranus shifting into the sign of Gemini. So this might be your greatest chance to actually figure out yourself where to live. I highly recommend this course to people who are able to understand the natal chart, or even practitioners who would like to get a little bit more knowledge on the basic astrocartography principles. It's going to be a very detailed one. It's available on my website, AstroViktor.com. But let's get going. So we are on the 14th. First up is Atlantis entering the sign of Taurus. Atlantis is astrological number is 1198. And it coincides with the Sun-Mercury Ceres conjunction, and it feels like it gives the karmic responsibility to finances, to self-worth. Atlantis is often associated with the misuse of power, even advanced technology, and the consequences of too much too fast. So, what I feel like with Mercury, Sun, Ceres, and Atlantis all in Taurus, while the triple conjunction focuses on growth and strategy, Atlantis entering Taurus serves as a reality check regarding sustainability. So it highlights where we may be over leveraging resources, pushing for growth without a solid foundation. I think it's about balancing ambitions with ethics, ensuring that building the empire doesn't lead to a burnout or a collapse. And even I feel like Atlantis is going to be helping us kind of balancing out the Mars energy later on this week, because Mars would like to get ahead. Taurus is a slow sign, and Atlantis is going to be highlighting why we shouldn't be rushing. So let's say you want to be implementing a new digital system, or you're coming up with a significant financial strategy. Atlantis is going to warn you against kind of cutting corners for the sake of the speed. So it somehow asks us to double check the ethics, the long-term viability of your plans. If you are using new technology to boost productivity, ensure you have the infrastructure, because Taurus represents physical reality, and we need that infrastructure to support it. We should avoid the Atlantis trap, which is about ignoring the warning signs of a system under too much pressure just because it looks profitable on paper today. So Atlantis in Taurus asks us to audit our foundation, auditing our ambition a little bit, or at least the ambitions must be grounded based on kind of like reality. Now, with Atlantis in Taurus, of course, we know that Taurus is it's a financial sign. So with Atlantis being in the sign of Taurus, I'm just thinking that the advanced technology things are going to be kind of like skyrocketing, for example. Even in financial astrology, Atlantis would be a warning signal anyway. So it's often associated with high risk, high reward cycle. Atlantis represented the lost civilization, so meaning it highlights where we have built complex, maybe high-tech financial systems on foundation that may be physically or ethically kind of like unstable. So Taurus rules the physical earth, currency, and tangible assets. So Atlantis rules high tech as well as the hybris. So this transit often points to the moment of reckoning for digital assets like crypto, AI-driven trading, and all those type of stuff that have become disconnected from their physical value. Now, Atlantis in Taurus actually can signal a certain type of flooding as well, or overwhelming pressure on banking system. It's like a bit of a leak in the dam. So if the financial infrastructure is a bit too complex to be understood or regulated, then this transit can bring the consequences of that too. Or there is a bit of a risk of being like greedily optimistic. Just as Atlantis was a paradise that fell due to its own expansion, Taurus energy under this transit can lead to overinvesting in too good to be true type of property or commodities. So let's just be mindful about that. Okay, so that would be Atlantis. I think that's more than enough to mention about Atlantis. So we might want to move on. And next day, on the 15th, we have another asteroid. Cassandra enters the sign of Gemini. Now, Cassandra's astrological number is 114, and Cassandra represents the ignored truth. So this asteroid is named after the Trojan prophets cursed by Apollo to speak accurate prophecies that no one listens to or no one believes. So this asteroid highlights issues of credibility, advice giving, and the frustration of being unheard. So we have got an unheard messenger here with Cassandra in the sign of Gemini, because Gemini represents communication, siblings, the local news. So in the sign of Taurus, we felt the truth. In the sign of Gemini, we feel the need to speak the truth. So this transit often coincides with a period where high quality information is available, but it might be dismissed. It might be kind of like classified as noise or gossip. It's the struggle for intellectual credibility, warnings that go unheeded. It's the Cassandra complex, basically. So you might find yourself presenting a very logical solution or a factual warning at work or in a group chat or to your sisters, siblings, and so forth, but it gets overlooked. Conversely, you might be the one ignoring a piece of fine print or a peer's advice because it seems too simple or even repetitive. So if you have an important message to deliver, pay extra attention to how you phrase it. In Gemini, the delivery needs to be witty as well as engaging to be heard. Same applies to a contractual agreement as well. Make sure that you check out the fine print. And maybe ask yourself, am I dismissing this information because it's wrong or because I don't like the person saying it? So that could be also very important with that. With Cassandra in the sign of Gemini, people can be talking a lot more as well, but listening less. So maybe it's also important that you focus on documenting your insights today, um, because you likely be proven right by the time Mercury enters Gemini, which is around the 17th anyway. Now, on the 16th, we have got Mars and Chiron conjunction happening on 28 degree. So that's on the same day as the new moon, which might be adding a bit more volatile kind of like energy to that new moon. That new moon is trying to ground you, right? But this conjunction acts like a raw nerve being sparked or hit. Mars is fast and assertive, while Chiron represents the wounded healer. So when they meet, it highlights where we feel weak, overlooked, not enough. And it triggers like a defensive, a courageous reaction to that pain. Of course, this is also the courage it's like a daring game to face your internal struggles. So this is the courage to act despite fear. It often brings up old wounds related to our independence, our right to exist, or our physical vitality. Mars is kind of like the digger archetype. So it digs up what is exactly wrong in that Aries part of our chart. But the healing happens through action, addressing that wound, the wound of the ego, which could lead to physical breakthroughs. So you might experience a moment of I don't have the right to exist, for example, or a flare up of an old frustration. And instead of suppressing it, this energy asks you to use that discomfort as fuel. It's like a surgical energy. It hurts because once you have got a surgery, it's going to hurt because they cut away what is stagnant within that body. But then the healing is going to start after. So you may need to be advocating for yourself in a way that feels uncomfortable, or you have to be exposed somehow. You know, be mindful of over extension as well, because this transit can coincide with minor injuries and typically past injuries that are kind of like resurfacing. So, I don't know, for example, you had a knee injury 15 years ago or 7 years ago, and then now there's going to be a slight injury to that knee, but maybe it exposes the way that knee injury should have been taken care of many years ago. So that's why we have to be a little bit careful. With this Mars and Chiron also, it's very possible that if we push too hard to prove our strength, then this is when the accident can happen. So we have to be listening to the body's limits. So that's an interesting one, right? New moon in the sign of Taurus, which wants us to be slow, eat well, build security, while Mars Chiron wants to charge forward, face the demons, burn it down, so that we can start the healing type of energy. I mean, you can use this Aries energy to have difficult conversations or do the scary tasks, you know. I feel like this aspect is actually very important because Mars is the dispositor of Chiron. So therefore, Chiron is sitting in the house of Mars, which means that the wounded healer is actually forced to use the Martian tools, action, heat, confrontation, physical drive to find a resolution to this problem. So, therefore, it's not a passive healing really or a quiet reflection. The healing happens through the doing bit. So Mars is the boss of this transit. So the wound is no longer a heavy weight to carry. It actually becomes a weapon. It becomes a tool. It's the mastery of force. Mars should know how to apply pressure. So in this conjunction, it's not just about vulnerability, it's about strategically applying that force, that pressure to that area of your life where you have you have previously felt paralyzed. You know, in Aries there is a risk of being, first to the fight. So, since Mars disposes Chiron, your actions might be driven by an old insecurity. The goal is to ensure that the action is reparative, not just reactive to a problem. I think this might be a day, for example, when you can ask for a raise or the lead role, specifically because you have been afraid, you weren't ready for it. And Mars can use that fear as an exact reason to move forward. It can really, like if you have been experiencing a plateau in fitness or a lingering injury, actually that Marsian dispositorship suggests a controlled burn, a high intensity effort, or a new aggressive physical therapy approach. And that could be breaking kind of like the stagnation. Or maybe you are ready to stand up for your own autonomy. Because Mars is in charge, the defense will be kind of sharp but decisive at the same time. Um, okay, so next day, 17th, so Mercury is shifted into the sign of Gemini, and it is actually making a conjunction immediately to Uranus. So this is happening on 1 degree of Gemini. So, but previous day Mercury is still on the energetic degree of Taurus, or the beginning of the day. So it is still closing down certain type of chapters in its life. And then it has got that lightning bolt moment where we have got a breakthrough. We have got an aha moment. Uranus acts like a high voltage current, like running through the wires of Mercury, and Mercury is kind of like the mind. So expect the unexpected in conversations, news, and technology. This is about radical insights, but the disrupting old thought patterns as well. Or you can get sudden news that changes your plan somehow. So this aspect is requiring a bit of a flexibility. You know, I mean, Mercury sometimes likes working on a routine task, not necessarily in the sign of Gemini, and definitely not with Uranus. So this is an out-of-the-box solution, and this isn't a day for a step-by-step logic, really. It's more about quantum leaps. So maybe you want to be launching something digital, but keep an eye on your devices. High voltage energy can sometimes lead to glitches or fried circuits. Or you might receive a text or email that completely shifts your perspective on a project. So be ready to pivot quickly, really. I really feel like with the Uranus and Mercury, it gives you a brilliant idea, or even it gives you a new data that might be actually justifying your actions. Um, it's a flashes of insight, really. So that's why we have to be staying a little bit more flexible. And on top of that, Mercury is out of bound as well. So it's kind of like a little bit of a double-edged Uranian feature. Mercury Uranus is innovation, but it can make us very, very restless mentally as well, or the focus could be pretty much shattered. So let's just be mindful about that. So you might want to keep a notepad or a voice recorder handy. The ideas coming through today are likely too fast to process in real time, but it might be super valuable for later on. This is not a day when you have to have rigid schedules, because you might want to leave a bit of a room for detour. Oh, we're still on the 17th, actually. Venus is in Gemini, sextile Mars, and Chiron as well at the same time. So, we had the Mars and Chiron conjunction. That's how we started, and it was a bit of a painful but assertive breakthrough. And it feels like that the 17th gave us the ability to articulate and harmonize that experience, and then Venus acts as a mediator, turning that warrior's scars into potentially a compelling story or a valuable negotiation tool. So this sextile is an opportunity and ease to talk things out, or to become more versatile, or even to become more persuasive. So I think this alignment allows us to take the courageous actions and then kind of smooth them over or market them effectively as well. This might be even talking to us about healing through connections. We might get the validation. We might get kind of like the acknowledgement that your pain is real. Maybe if you stood your ground on the 16th with Mars and Chiron, then today is the day you sit down and talk it through. And you can now explain your boundaries in a way that others find maybe charming or intellectually stimulating rather than just that aggressive side of things. Because Mars and Chiron can feel aggressive. I think this is actually a peak window for writers, speakers, content creators. Maybe you can take a personal vulnerability, a story of yours, and then turn it into a piece of content that resonates deeply with your audience, and then you can get recognized for it. Maybe friends or siblings are offering encouragement. You need to validate the risk you took over the Mars and Chiron conjunction. So while we have got the Mercury conjunct Uranus, like I said, those are sudden insights. That Venus sextile Mars and Chiron, that smooth communication out. So it could be really good to talk about what we want to do in a relationship. It can give you a lot of social opportunities as well. That kind of rewards your recent bravery. Uh, this is also brilliant for collaboration as well. So you can really reach out to your network. With Uranus and Mercury, you've got the genius idea. And then now the Taurus part can make it solid. And then the Gemini part of your chart kind of wants to sell that idea or we can share that with Venus to others quite effectively. So for me, it feels like that you are being seen and heard as well. But everything happens very speedy with this. It might be about reparative, like repairing social connections, for example. And while Mars and Chiron is fighting for the self, but Venus is suggesting two other options in the sign of Gemini. Maybe one option is that what if you spoke about it, and what if we collaborated, for example, with others? Now, on the 18th, Mercury actually makes a sextile to Vesta in the sign of Aries, while actually it makes a conjunction to Cassandra as well. So again, information comes through very quickly. Vesta is a laser-like devotion to the truth. So we had these lightning bolts, and then we start dedicating ourselves to share a message, for example. But we have got that Cassandra, right? Which is a prophetic asteroid. So your intuition and your intellect are working in sync, actually. And with that sextile to Vesta, the asteroid of sacred focus and devotion, ensures that this isn't a scattered Gemini energy. It is an energy directed towards a singular, a kind of like important goal. So intellectually, we are getting devoted, speaking our unfiltered truth, focusing on the inner work, for example, focusing on the voice of someone, but maybe your opinion is not going to be listened to. But it feels like this is about deep work. Maybe you do a lot of editing with this. Maybe you have the ability to spot the ignored truth within a pile of data, or that Vesta might give you the stamina to sit down and then organize your letters, emails, presentations, and all those type of stuff. Maybe you have been struggling to kind of find the soul of a project, then this aspect pattern can actually reveal it to you. And it's about focusing on the truth, focusing on the details, but without losing the bigger picture though. I mean, you may have a conversation where you say exactly what needs to be said, even if it's uncomfortable. Because of the Vesta influence, your words do carry a sense of mission within it. So with Cassandra enter the sign of Gemini, it might be where the truth is being ignored. But then Mercury catches up to her, and maybe you have felt unheard. But on the 18th, you kind of find the logical like structure or the precise words needed to make people finally listen to you. So it's about you documenting the truth, backing it up with facts and data. I think it also does talk to you about mental discipline as well as integrity. So, choose one difficult project that requires your absolute focus. And then maybe turn off the notifications, and you can really use that Mercury Vesta window to produce high quality work. That aspect makes you sharp, observant, dedicated. You are kind of like turning information into insights. So you can really use this energy to validate your own findings. And most likely you don't need external approval when the facts are on your side. However, Mercury on the next day is running into a square with the nodes. So of course, North Node is still in the sign of Pisces, while the South Node is in the sign of Virgo. And Mercury at the same time trines Pluto as well and sextiles Neptune. So this is quite a complex intellectual day, right? All on the 19th. Um, I think you are being asked to pivot away from a hypercritical, obsessive details of the past, which is South Node in Virgo, and move towards a more intuitive, holistic, and spiritual understanding of reality. It feels like it's a mental rerouting. With Mercury and Pluto, this is about a detective energy. So, but with Mercury squaring the nodes, acts as a crossroads. So you may feel a tension between wanting to organize every tiny detail and needing to just trust the process, which is the Pisces North Node. However, the trine to Pluto and the sextile to Neptune provides the tools to bridge the gap. So Mercury trine Pluto gives you the X-ray vision. You can see the power dynamics, the hidden agendas, the structural truth beneath the surface. We can really convince someone about our own truth. While Mercury sextile Neptune, it's a bit of an inspired communication, so your logic is being softened by your imagination. Therefore, it makes it a perfect day for creative writing, dreaming, explaining complex spiritual concepts, making discoveries about your own chart, for example. So I can imagine in the business world, for example, we might discover a flaw in a system with Mercury trine Pluto. But instead of panicking, we find a creative, visionary way to fix it. And that's the Neptune and South nodes. So, in communication, I can imagine that you might be having a conversation that feels very fated because of the square to the nodes. What you say today could significantly alter your trajectory actually for the rest of the year. I think this does tell you not to get bogged down in small stuff. That's the Virgo South Node. I think we have to be focusing on the big whys, which is Pisces North Node. And then we can use that investigative skills to uncover the truth. Then we can use our imagination to build something better. Um, I think you should avoid analysis paralysis. Like, if you find yourself obsessing over little tiny errors, kind of zoom out a little bit and then look at the spiritual and the long-term objective there. But I think it's also a great one for high stakes negotiations, creative brainstorming. You can have the ability to influence others. Neptune says trust your guts as much as trusting the data as well, which is Pluto. Now, the reason I think this is also important aspect this week because Mercury is the dispositor of that south node. So it also feels like, and with Mercury trine Pluto, it feels like that you have got the mental strength to break karmic cycles. It's like a karmic clearing, really. So, Mercury is in charge. It is ready to leave something behind. It is ready to purge. The South Node is sometimes the drain. And Mercury in Gemini is kind of like the plumber. So we are diagnosing the blockage. And then we are rerouting that flow towards the North Node in Pisces. So maybe it's not just about letting go, it's about a strategic dismantling of outdated mental habits, for example. That Virgo South Node has got a tendency to obsess over tiny details, micromanaging, getting paralyzed by a to-do list that kind of never ends. And Mercury in Gemini uses its agility to look at these Virgo obsessions and say, well, that is no longer efficient. So let me just identify this data clutter that is preventing me from reaching my vision, which is the Pisces North Node. So, if you have been spending 80% of your time on 20% of the results, which is a very classic South Node in Virgo, the Mercury Pluto trines gives you the power to delete those tasks without any type of guilt. So therefore, it's a mental decluttering type of energy. I would say that the step one is identify one repetitive, small-minded task that drain your energy. Number two would be use the Pluto trine to cut it out and automate it. And number three, use the Neptune sextile to spend that newly freed time kind of like on your vision work. You cannot reach the North Node in Pisces while your mind is still held hostage by the South Node in the sign of Virgo, which is, of course, about details. I think now you have got the key to your own prison, and maybe you can actually let yourself go. So that's the most important part of things. And I love that. Now, on the 19th, Venus actually enters Cancer and immediately squares Vesta. So it's a bit of a tension, right, between the need for emotional security and kind of like a home base, and that fierce independent drive to maintain one's personal mission or kind of like a sacred flame. Now, I did make a separate video about Venus in Gemini versus Venus in Cancer because Venus is out of bound until 8th of June. So you might want to be referring back to that video because I break that down for you. But Venus in Cancer seeks to protect, to nurture, and to connect. It prioritizes the inner circle, the family, the emotional comfort. While Vesta in Aries is kind of like the archetype of self-sovereign. So it is focused on a singular, independent path and can feel burdened by that emotional demands of the family or the country or others. So this aspect is surely asking us to negotiate the balance between self-dedication and caretaking, internal versus external priority checks. Maybe this is a bit of a feeling to pull, to retreat, or focus on your home life or a personal passion project. But maybe you have got this pressing professional or physical goal which demands your absolute focus. So a square might create that sense of guilt or friction. Like, do I take care of myself or my loved ones? Do I stay dedicated to my mission or am I going to, help others reach their mission? Maybe a partner or a family member might want more of your time just as you are hitting kind of like the flow state in your solo work. Or you may feel the need to soften your branding or approach to be more inclusive, but your core mission feels like it requires a sharper, more aggressive edge. So again, it is asking us to make adjustment. It is asking us to make a decision. And the sun moves into the sign of Gemini, which of course will want you to talk, explore, and be curious. Venus in Cancer wants you to feel safe and nurtured, and that square to Vesta reminds you that you cannot nurture everything at the expense of of yourself, basically. So maybe it's about you feeling pulled apart by external demands, but this is a day when you have to define what is sacred to you and what is simply a distraction. And maybe the distraction is an emotional need, but it's not backed up with with data, for example. And of course, Mars enters the sign of Taurus as well. So that's a slow, steady burn. Mars is in detriment in the sign of Taurus. So, it's a challenge because Taurus doesn't want to rush. However, this could be incredibly valuable for follow through, physical endurance, for example. This is kind of like the archetype where we did the sprinting in the sign of Aries. Now we are preparing for the marathon. Because Taurus is about the building, like that's the builder energy. So this is not the initial spark of an idea. It's more about the grind required to make that idea a physical reality. This is persistence chosen over speed. It's about physical stamina. It's about a financial defense, stubborn determination. So this could work out really well. If you started a new fitness routine with Mars and Chiron conjunction, or even a business project, then this is when you can really dig in. This is when you may feel less motivated by excitement, but more driven by necessity or results as well. This is a transit which is ready to put the long hours in, just to make it financially like rewarding. And most likely, this Mars doesn't want you to start 10 things at the same time. It says finish the one, that big one, and then after we can move on to something else. And I think your energy level becomes more earthy as well. And you might see that you will need more time to rest. But actually, when you do work, your strength is more sustained. Um, yes, that's pretty much. However, watch out for stubbornness, for the sake of being right. If a method isn't working, Mars in Taurus can make you want to just push harder. So this is where you might want to be using the Mercury Pluto, trying to make sure that you are pushing into the right direction. And maybe with Mars in Taurus, we just want to be tackling the most physically or logistically demanding task rather than doing something that we kind of like just might like doing for the sake of, wanting to do it. So, guys, this is your weekly energy pattern. Of course, Mars is going to be super important very shortly because it's going to be running into a square to Pluto. But that's going to be next week. So let's talk about that later on. Good luck, everyone, and I will see you next, my next forecast. Bye bye.